I thought success would make me happy, but I was empty inside. For a long time, I did not know how to say that honestly, because on the outside, my life looked like the kind of life I was supposed to want. I had responsibilities, I had progress, I had goals, I had things people respected, I had work to point to, I had reasons to say I was doing well enough. And yet there was this quiet emptiness that followed me into rooms where, according to the script, I should have felt fulfilled. That emptiness confused me for years, because I thought unhappiness belonged to people who failed. I thought restlessness belonged to people who had no direction. I thought if a man kept moving upward, kept building, kept achieving, then peace would eventually come as a reward. That is what I believed, and that belief stole years from me. I do not mean I was miserable every day. I was functional, capable, productive. I could move through life and do what needed to be done. I could set goals and pursue them. I could make decisions, handle pressure, stay composed, look respectable, keep going. But being able to function is not the same as being alive inside your own life. That is something many men learn too late. We get very good at performance, at responsibility, at carrying weight, at appearing stable. We know how to keep the machine going. But if no one teaches us to ask what the machine is actually for, we can spend decades building a life that looks impressive from the outside and still feels emotionally vacant on the inside. That was my life for a long time. I kept thinking the next thing would finally settle me. A little more money, a little more status, a little more recognition, a little more stability, a little more proof that I was moving in the right direction. And every time I reached one of those things, I felt relief for a moment. That is the dangerous part. Success often does give you something. It gives you momentum, validation, temporary satisfaction. It quiets insecurity for a little while. But if the deeper structure of your life is empty, external progress cannot fill it for long. It can distract you. It can flatter you. It can reassure you just enough to keep you chasing. But it cannot become meaning if it was never connected to meaning in the first place. I think a lot of men confuse movement with fulfillment. I did. If I was building, earning, improving, planning, or climbing, I assumed I must be okay. I assumed that whatever loneliness or numbness I felt would disappear once I reached the next level. That is one of the great lies of ambition. It tells you that your peace is waiting one milestone away. It tells you that exhaustion is temporary, that emptiness is just a transitional feeling, that your inner life can be neglected for now because the outer structure is still rising. And if you believe that long enough, you can become a man who looks increasingly successful while becoming less and less present to his own soul. My problem was not that I had no discipline, not that I had no drive. If anything, I had enough ambition to keep myself from asking harder questions. Ambition can do that. It can give you a reason to postpone honesty. It can make you say, now is not the time to think deeply. Now is the time to build. Now is the time to push. Now is the time to focus, to perform, to reach, to stabilize. I'll deal with the inner stuff later. I'll rest later. I'll think later. I'll reconnect later. I'll ask what I actually want later. But later is where many men hide from themselves. And while they are hiding, they call it productivity. That was me. I was always headed toward something, but I was rarely still enough to ask whether the thing I was heading toward was capable of giving me what I actually needed. I did not understand that success can solve certain problems and still leave the deepest ones untouched. It can improve comfort without creating peace. It can increase options without creating clarity. It can elevate image without creating identity. It can generate admiration without generating love. It can produce stimulation without producing meaning. And if a man is not careful, he can become addicted to the chase because the chase keeps him from facing the possibility that what he is chasing is not what he truly needs. I know that addiction now, not always to money in the crude sense, sometimes to achievement itself, to movement, to measurable progress, to the feeling of being on the way. It made me feel safer than stillness. Stillness is where truth lives, and I was not always ready for truth. Because truth was beginning to say something I did not want to hear. Maybe what you are building is not wrong, but maybe it is not enough. Maybe you are doing what is expected, what is admired, what makes sense on paper, and still failing to nourish the deeper parts of your life. Maybe the emptiness is not a temporary side effect. Maybe it is a signal. For years, I ignored that signal. I told myself I was just tired, or stressed, or in a demanding season, and some of that was true. But tiredness does not explain everything. Stress does not explain everything. There is a particular kind of inner emptiness that comes not from doing too much, but from doing things that do not fully belong to your deepest self. It is the feeling of being capable and still oddly untouched by your own life, of functioning and still feeling emotionally absent, of having things to show and still not knowing what all of it means. That emptiness grows when a man is faithful to his goals, but unfaithful to his inner truth. I think part of the problem is how men are taught to define success. We are trained early to think in terms of performance, reliability, status, financial stability, visible outcomes. That is not entirely wrong. These things matter. A man should want to be responsible. He should want to build. He should want to become stronger, steadier, more capable. But if those values are severed from the deeper questions of purpose, relationship, presence, and inner alignment, they can create a hollow form of masculinity. Strong on the outside, thin on the inside. A life built to be respected, more than a life built to be inhabited. That was my mistake. I built for respect before I built for peace. I built for recognition before I built for inner clarity. I built for evidence before I built for aliveness. I thought if I could just become enough in the eyes of the world, something quiet inside me would finally settle. But the world does not know how to settle a man's soul. It can reward him, it can praise him, it can envy him, it can need him. But it cannot tell him whether he is truly alive inside the life he has built. There were moments when this truth broke through. They usually came when the noise stopped. Late at night, after a goal was reached, after a good week, after the thing I thought would satisfy me had already happened and I was left alone with myself again. That is when I started seeing the pattern. I was not only chasing progress, I was trying to outrun something. Silence, emptiness, the fear that if I stopped moving, I would have to face how little of my inner life I had actually cultivated. I knew how to build external structure. I did not always know how to build inner substance. That is a dangerous imbalance, because when external growth outpaces inner formation, a man starts becoming larger in the world and smaller inside himself. He becomes more impressive and less grounded, more capable and less connected, more successful and less able to enjoy what he has built. He starts needing the next win because the last one faded too quickly. And because ambition still looks noble, nobody immediately names the problem. They say he is driven, focused, high-performing, going places. But underneath all of that, he may be emotionally starving. I was starving in ways I did not know how to describe. Not for entertainment, not for more comfort, for depth, for real peace, for a sense that my life was rooted in something more than progress, for a feeling that I was not only accumulating markers of success, but actually becoming someone whose life felt inhabited, coherent, and true. That kind of hunger gets more painful when ignored, not less, because each new success raises the stakes. If this doesn't satisfy me, then what does that mean? If I can reach things I once wanted and still feel empty afterward, then what exactly have I been trusting all these years? That question scared me because the honest answer threatened my whole operating system. It suggested that some of what I called ambition was actually avoidance. Some of what I called discipline was actually fear of stillness. Some of what I called success was built around validation more than vocation. I did not want to believe that. Most men do not. We want to believe our striving is clean, purposeful, worthy. But sometimes striving is mixed. Sometimes a man is not only moving towards something, he is also moving away from himself. I look back now and see how much of my happiness was conditional. I'll be happy when things are more secure. I'll be happy when I reach this number, this title, this milestone. I'll be happy when people stop doubting me. I'll be happy when I prove what I'm capable of. That kind of thinking is seductive because it keeps hope alive. But it is borrowed hope. It keeps peace always slightly out of reach. And once a man becomes accustomed to postponing his happiness until after achievement, he can spend his whole life making peace contingent on outcomes that never stay satisfying for long. There is another cost to this kind of life that people do not talk about enough. it affects your relationships. A man who is inwardly empty often becomes outwardly difficult to know, not always rude, not always absent, but preoccupied, restless, emotionally expensive. He is physically there, but part of him is still with his goals, his pressure, his next target, his unresolved dissatisfaction. He may love deeply, but he does not always arrive deeply. He may care for his family, but he does not always let them feel his full presence, because so much of him is still chasing the next thing he believes will make him okay. I became that kind of man in seasons, present but not fully available, accomplishing but not always alive, giving but not always warm. I would tell myself I was building something for the people I loved, and maybe I was, but I was also offering them a version of me that was still waiting to feel enough. That affects a home, it affects a marriage, it affects children. People can feel when your body is in the room but your spirit is still out trying to earn peace from the world. And the irony is that the things I was chasing were not always wrong. Work matters, growth matters, contribution matters, excellence matters. I am not arguing for passivity or laziness. I am saying that when success becomes your emotional strategy instead of your honest expression, it begins to hollow you out. When you ask achievement to do what only meaning can do, you turn your life into a performance with no real resting place, and performers eventually get tired, no matter how admired they are. What finally changed for me was not a bigger failure or a bigger success. It was clarity, painful clarity. The realization that I had spent too many years assuming happiness would come from outside in. More proof, more progress, more respect, more security. But happiness, or at least the kind of peace I was truly starving for, was never going to come that way. It had to come from a life that matched what I actually valued. A life with room for truth, presence, relationship, purpose, gratitude, and enough stillness to hear myself clearly. Not only a life that looked successful, but one that felt inhabited, that required change, internal change first. I had to stop asking achievement to be my therapist, my priest, my father, my proof, my anesthesia. I had to stop using work to avoid harder emotional questions. I had to stop equating motion with meaning. I had to admit that some of my ambition had become an elegant way of not dealing with my own emptiness directly. That admission was humiliating at first, but it was also freeing. Because once you stop asking the wrong thing to save you, you can finally start building a life around what actually has the power to make you whole. If I could speak to my younger self, I would tell him this: build, yes. Work, yes. Become excellent, yes. But do not trust success to heal what only truth can heal. Do not ask money, titles, progress, or admiration to settle your spirit. They cannot. Build a life you can live inside, not just one you can display. Learn to be still before you become too dependent on movement. Learn to ask what your striving is serving. Learn to tell the difference between ambition that expresses your gifts and ambition that hides your wounds. I would tell him that happiness is not the reward at the end of endless proving. It is more fragile and more immediate than that. It lives in alignment, in meaning, in being at peace with yourself when no one is clapping, in living a life that feels true in private, in having people you can really be with, not just impress, in work that costs something real because it matters, not because you need it to tell you who you are, in knowing that your value does not rise and fall with your latest results. I would tell him that emptiness is not always a sign that you need more. Sometimes it is a sign that you need different rhythms, different definitions, different relationships to work, money, identity, and worth. Different courage, because one of the bravest things a man can do is stop building long enough to ask whether what he is building is actually capable of making life feel meaningful. I thought success would make me happy, but I was empty inside. That sentence hurts because it exposes how long I believed the wrong promise. But maybe it can save someone else time if I say it plainly enough. If that someone is you, then hear me clearly. Do not wait until you have everything you thought you wanted to discover that you neglected the parts of life that actually make a soul feel alive. Do not spend years becoming impressive while remaining inwardly unanchored. Do not make success your religion. It is too weak a god. Build, yes, but build with truth. Build with presence. Build with enough inner honesty that your life does not become all structure and no spirit. Because in the end, the saddest thing is not failing publicly. The saddest thing is succeeding in ways the world respects while privately knowing you have not yet built a life that feels worth coming home to inside yourself.